And then a few years ago, I was someone who was always interested in design, interior design, but I had that inner like, oh, I could never do that. Like, that's not me. And then one day I realized, why not? Why couldn't I do it? Right? Other people do it. So yeah, I started to move down that path.
Claudette, you mentioned a very important point. The why not? I think so many people stop right there because of I think it's that fear of the unknown sometimes.
I think the fear of the unknown, right? And then how you're, at least for some of us, kind of how you're raised, right? And like what's pragmatic and what's, that creative stuff is kind of over there. Like, would you make any money doing that?
Join me, Jeremy Swick, on Into the Unknown, a podcast that delves into the personal journeys, stories, and experiences of individuals across diverse professions. As a historian by trade, I firmly believe that our personal histories shape our present and offer valuable insights into our paths ahead. With that being said, let's get into it. On this episode of Into the Unknown, I'm joined with a very special guest, Claudette Rowley. How are you doing today, Claudette?
I'm doing great, Jeremy. How are you?
I can't complain. I'm excited. It's a great day today.
It is a great day. Yeah. Like,
So I'd like to kick off the show and talk about the importance of networking. How are we actually connected?
I think we're connected through the podcast collaborative Facebook group. I
Yeah,
believe so. Yeah. Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I really like the collaborative nature of that group and just people trying to help each other, people trying to share their stories and their ideas.
Yeah, it was interesting. I actually found out about it through networking, to your point, right? I was on some other networking at an event and I said, I really want to get on podcasts. And someone said, oh, you should check this group out. So the power of networking, right? One thing led to the next. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. And I think so much of it is looking through people who have those authentic stories to share. And of
Mhm.
course, don't like any kind of group, you have to kind of cut through some of the nonsense. But in general, it's been great to find guests and meet people that way as well.
It's been, yeah, and it was interesting. I was really impressed by the range, right? I mean, people are hosting podcasts about so many interesting things, right? That I might not have ever thought of. So it's kind of a treasure trove of opportunity in there.
It
Yeah.
really is. So, I want to know a little bit more about you, that comic book issue number one, that origin story. Who are you?
The origin story. Yeah. And I love that, the comic book issue. I would say, origin story is like, I am a lifelong designer. I have always loved color. Like, and this is my fourth career as an interior designer. I mean, fourth career in general, the fourth one being interior design. And when I look back, I've always loved color. I've always loved design. I've always loved solving problems and helping people. And so I've taken that through, three previous careers to get to here. But what's really interesting for me is when I look at what I'm doing now in design, I take everything I've learned before and I'm still using it all. You know what I mean? It's like this accumulation of skills and experiences and strengths that now I get to help people in the built and interior environment.
I think it's one of those things that you mentioned your fourth career. I'm in my third currently.
Okay.
And it's not like once you leave that career, everything disappears. It's more like building blocks, like you mentioned, of
Yeah.
skills and things you've learned throughout the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. It totally is, and my first one career was social work. And then I moved into coaching back in 2000 when you said I was a coach and people said, oh, what sport? People really didn't know about coaching. So you were educating them, about it. And then moved into doing organizational development consulting and helping teams and organizations. And so, like you said, everything builds, one thing built on the next. And then a few years ago, I was someone who was always interested in design, interior design, but I had that inner like, oh, I could never do that. Like, that's not me. And then one day I realized, why not? Why couldn't I do it? Right? Other people do it. So yeah, I started to move down that path.
Claudette, you mentioned a very important point, the why not. I think so many people stop right there because of I think it's that fear of the unknown sometimes.
I think the fear of the unknown, right? And then how you're, at least for some of us, kind of how you're raised, right? And like what's pragmatic and what's, that creative stuff is kind of over there. Like, would you make any money doing that? That sort of thing, right? So it's like off the table. It's like, at least for me, it was off the table. It wasn't even a consideration. It wasn't even part of the menu, right? Until a few years ago. So yeah, and then the why not? Like, why wouldn't I?
Claudette, I
Yeah.
appreciate that too as well because, as you mentioned, some of those more artistic or unconventional approaches. I have a master's degree in history, and a lot of times you got, what are you going to do with that? Teach? And I was
Right.
actually in education. I ended up moving towards museums, and
Mhm.
so, but I completely understand. A lot of times it is that it's not even a thought of that's an actual
Mhm.
job or a career.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was an English major in college, and oh, are you going to teach? It was the same thing. I said, no, I don't want to be. It's funny. I do teach in unconventional ways, right? But I didn't want to be a teacher, right? I didn't want to be in the education field. So yeah, but the people, and then look at all the interesting ways you're applying, right? your your original degree. I've been applying, in lots of different ways. So it's interesting, when you get into your career and really love it. I think, and you keep following your passions and your interests, you can end up in a lot of great places.
Claudette, I think you hit on an important point. The following your passions and interests. While it maybe not is a career in that second, I think
Hmm.
it gives more opportunities to open those doors, or maybe even open the windows and kind of peek inside what might be in there and see. Maybe it's something I'd like, maybe it's something I wouldn't like, but it's kind of nice being able to start exploring it even more.
Yeah, it is. And when I look back at kind of the what got me into interior design is I took a 2-day color certification class just for me, right? I was doing, redecorating my house, and I wanted to learn more, and that kind of, I'm just going to do this because it's fun, right? It's interesting. It was on Zoom. This was during the pandemic. So it was on Zoom, and 2 days on Zoom. And it just felt it was like halfway through, I started Googling, how do you become an interior designer? Like, because I'm like, wait a minute, why am I taking this? I love this. Like, why am I not really looking into it professionally? Yeah. So
Yeah,
follow your passions. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. It's so funny you mentioned that because a lot of my jobs in the museum field became designing exhibits. And
Right.
I never looked at myself as an artistic person. But then the more and more you look and you actually finish a room or you finish an exhibit, and it's like, maybe I do have a little bit of artistic ability, whether while it's not on paper per se, it's the way you kind of look and arrange a room, I think is not easy, but it's one of those things that I definitely think it's an artistic expression.
I agree. It completely is. And Boston has a great museum of fine arts, and we go there, and it is just to see how the exhibits are arranged, right? And you go, I mean, it kind of makes or breaks it, right? I love that, and I love to see how they've designed the exhibits, and I love this museum is great about having a little, paragraph next to each piece of art explaining something about it, which I love. Speaking of history, like, oh, what is this about? What was going on? Who was this person? And I love putting it's that understanding the history of a place or a piece of art combined with the design, I think really brings that to life.
It really is. And the more I studied history, I think it's so important to really understand and look at the built environment, how things were designed.
Yeah.
I remember in grad school, we had to go and do surveys of historic homes and help
Okay.
determine with the city if they were historic or not. I still have my giant guide of houses and
Yeah.
looking at the different layouts and
Yeah.
designs and learning about everything from how a lot of them were ordered from Sears catalog, even though they were beautiful. You never
Hmm.
really know that until you kind of get into the weeds of that.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, I love that you did that. I love, historic homes and touring, and, seeing, how people lived and what was done. And it's just, I also done a little bit of real estate investing, and I flipped a house in a town in northern Massachusetts a couple of years ago. And it was from, what was it? It was from the early 1900s, and so we did have to go before the historical commission, to your point, because we wanted to dormer out one side of the roof, and so we knew the house wasn't technically historic, and it turns out it wasn't. But we still had to do that. We had to go there because they wanted to make sure, right, if it was deemed historic, that it was preserved in the right way. And they definitely took it really seriously. You could tell the people on the commission were very knowledgeable, yeah, about the
Yeah.
history of the town. Yeah.
It's very impressive. It's one thing to go from taking a certification to actually going all in. What kind of
Yeah.
pushed you to go towards that?
It was really, it was following the passion, it was really falling in love with it. I've always been a follow the passion kind of person, for better or worse. Right. It's not always the easy path, right? Not always. Um, so yeah. And I was still in my other career, right? So I had a salary coming in, so that made it a little bit easier, right, to make the transition in terms of, it wasn't going all in financially. But I started doing, additional courses. I did a couple of pro bono projects for friends just to kind of, get my feet wet. I joined a mentoring group with a really seasoned interior designer and successful interior designer, which was super helpful. So I really started to dig in by doing it and then learning it right from people who are really good at it. So I took that approach, and that's has worked out well. Yeah.
Claire, you mentioned a very important point, the mentoring. As you mentioned in the early 2000s, you were a coach and people asked
Right.
what sport it was.
Right.
I don't think enough people reach out or find coaches or find mentoring groups because I think a lot of times, again, as you mentioned, in sports, it makes sense to have a coach.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe even working out, it might make sense to have a personal trainer. But I think more and more we're getting into the sphere of realizing how important mentorship and
Mm-hmm.
those kind of things are.
Yeah, I think it's huge. And I guess because I've been a coach, I often had a coach, right? So I had that experience. So for me, it was really, yeah. But and a lot of times when people, you mentioned sports, right? That people in sports have coaches. And I would mention to people in sports also have sports psychologists, right? They are working on their brains, their minds, their mindset, their emotions, their psychology in order to be the very best they can be physically, right? And I know for a lot of folks that helps to connect some of the dots, like, oh, okay. Or like a famous musician, right? And like almost anybody who's highly successful in what they're doing, especially the people we see in the public sphere, right? They didn't just wake up one day and get good, right? They have mentors, coaches, whatever, whoever they need to help guide them and help them train and improve their skills.
And
Yeah.
I think it's so important to find the right coaches. And I always love having a coach because they see that bird's eye view of what you're doing. I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we get lost in the minutia of what's
Oh,
going on.
yeah.
And we don't see that instead of busting through this door, busting through this wall, we can probably just walk outside and go around. It's a lot of times where I think we make it harder on ourselves sometimes.
Oh, totally. And I can completely relate to that, personally as well, that and certainly from coaching folks over time. But yeah, we make it harder than it needs to be, like you said, just through our own thought process sometimes, right? The story, right? The story in your head, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In everyone's journey, you make a decision, not really knowing the outcome. Can you give me a time where you just went for it?
Absolutely. You know, I mean, interior design, which we've already talked about, is certainly an example, I think, of going for it. The other time I would say that I really went for it was I had, as I mentioned, a consulting business doing organizational development, leadership development consulting, and I was really, really, really interested in organizational culture. And so I kind of went for it. I transformed my business to focus on that. I ended up writing a book and doing different things related to it. And that was a bit of a leap into the unknown because people were just starting to talk about organizational and business culture, right? And change it, start to transform it. So it was right kind of on the edge of that wave. Um, and I wasn't sure exactly what was going to happen there. But so that was another leap into the unknown. So.
That's one of the things you mentioned already, a couple leaps into the unknown. One thing I've realized, it gets a little bit easier each time. Well, don't get me wrong, it might be terrifying. You really don't know because it is the unknown. I think the more you step out of the more you step out of your comfort zone,
Yeah.
I think slightly easier it gets.
I agree because you have it's like you have your I'm envisioning my suitcase or something, right? You have your toolkit, you have that, the things you need to bring with you. Um, and I think it's having, like, as we've already talked, mentor or a coach, some kind of guide, right? Someone who knows more than you do. At least that's how I approach it about a topic. How am I going to educate myself? What's my safety net, right? What's my backup plan? What if this doesn't work? What's plan B? Those things always help me take that leap, right? And also just really um, being strategic. That's what I was looking for. Being strategic about it, right? What is the real, is it too big of a risk? What is the actual downside, right? I think that always helps to understand the true downside of something not working out, right? And I mean, sort of like from a strategic perspective, not like the voice in my head that's saying this is a bad idea, right? Which are two different things.
Claudette, I couldn't agree more because it is two different things, and sometimes I think we let the voice inside speak a little louder because sometimes it isn't as risky as maybe our brain is telling us. Maybe it's different, but I think it's important to have that perspective as well.
Yeah, it is. And the other thing is, at least for me, is listening to my gut, my intuition. What is my gut saying? What is my intuition saying about this? And really, I've learned to really trust that. Like if it's saying not a good idea, it usually isn't a good idea. Right.
Yeah, it's funny. There's something to say about that intuition, that gut. I mean, like, you kind of just, at this point, I just kind of listen to it. If even if it seems like it makes sense, if there's something telling me this isn't a good idea, this isn't the right fit, then
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, all right, I don't understand why, but I'm trusting whatever this feeling might be, and a lot of times it turns out well.
Yeah, definitely. Or, even I can't think of a great example right now, but I know I've had gut feelings, like you said, that just really didn't make sense. And I'm like, all right, okay. Either I'm doing that or I'm not doing that, whatever it's directing. And then I'll find out later, 6 months later or whatever, that, oh, that's why. That all made sense. Yeah.
So, title of the podcast, "Into the Unknown." What are you
Mhm.
working on? Tell me a little bit more about your company.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So, I'm super excited because I have shifted my interior design business slightly into really focusing on what's called neuroaesthetic and biophilic design, which are super long words, but all they really mean is we're using the science of nature and the science of beauty to transform spaces in a way that help people really feel good and helps them heal. So I love that we can take, just by understanding how our spaces operate, we can actually help people heal, decrease their stress, increase vibrancy, joy, motivation, however you want to feel in your space. Um, so that's something I'm really excited about. And then I'm also working on an interior design project called the Sparrow Collective. Well, hopefully will be. The Sparrow Collective it's based in Massachusetts, and it's the first residential space for women and their children going through divorce. So I'm super excited to participate in that and be able to bring in, create a space that helps women heal, that helps empower them, helps them move forward in their lives. So super excited about that as well.
So, tell me a little bit more about the view and what got you into that version of interior design.
A couple of years ago, I went to a one day workshop at the Boston Design Center, and it was on this idea of bringing science into design. So the neuroaesthetics, which is really the neuroscience of design, how our brains respond to beauty in certain ways that are very evolutionary, meaning it's encoded into our DNA. I like things. I love stuff like that. So I'm like, I'm going to go. It was free, So I went down for the day, went to the workshop, and then was always really interested in it, but didn't do much with it. And then when the Sparrow Collective opportunity came up, I realized biophilic design, which is bringing patterns of nature into the interior design, or into the built environment, could be interior or exterior. I realized it was an amazing fit for that project because it was going to help people's nervous systems calm down. It was going to help people feel better, help them heal. And so I quickly signed up for a program called the Science and Design Certification, and completed that, and then applied that to this project, creating the initial design and mood boards for this project. So that's, it was really an organic, kind of as we've been talking about, organic evolutionary process of something showing up and realizing I'm a very real world application person. So I like things I can apply. And so once I realized I had an application for it, I was all in. I'm going to dive in and learn this and, yeah, and use it.
I think it's so fascinating what we can actually do with the built environment. As we mentioned, a little bit my perspective is the historical perspective, but I've had
Yeah.
a lot of people I worked with in grad school that kind of lean even more into the built environment. Of course, the traditional museum, it's the exit through the gift shop, but it's
Right.
so
Oh yeah.
fascinating to me to learn why benches are placed specific places so people can
Mm-hmm.
observe how the art museum works if you're not as used to it. I mean, there's just so many little tools, I won't say tricks, but ways to kind of
Mm-hmm.
design the built environment around your goal or message.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing that's really, fascinated me about what I've been learning. And even you mentioned benches, right? So we have, if people who research things like this have found that if, and I was pointing back toward, if there was a bench behind me, right? Benches or seating along the perimeter of a space, people, or you even see it in a restaurant, people will sit there first before if it's a restaurant, the table's in the middle of the restaurant, because from an evolutionary and a survivalistic perspective, right, we're safer with our backs against something looking out, right? And stuff we don't really think about until you learn, and then you see it everywhere. Like, of course more people are sitting at the perimeter of a room because it's just safer to have a solid surface behind your back, be able to look out and survey, like you said, and observe what's happening. So if a predator was coming at you, you were going to know it. Versus if I'm in the middle of a room, I have space behind my back. Someone could be behind my back, right? It's really, like you said, it's fascinating. Once you start, you even learn a little bit about it, and then you just see it everywhere.
It's one of those things,
Yeah.
Claudia, you mentioned you can't unsee it. And it's so funny because my friends, if we go to museums, they laugh because, well, of course I appreciate whatever I'm going to look at, but I'm
Yeah.
also looking at how they're,
Yeah.
hanging their exhibit gallery, or how it's set up, or, why places or why things are specifically where they are. And it's one of those things that I really enjoy and I've found interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of the same way with color, like just to, understanding color in a space, because that's a lifelong passion of mine. And I'll go, how does this color feel? Like you said, you can't unsee it, right? Is it making me stressed? Is it making me calm? What's it like? What color would I have painted this space? Or, what would I do differently here? It is kind of like this ticker tape in your mind of analysis, right? Right.
Well, it's so funny you mentioned it, and kind of this whole theme of the podcast is experiences, built on top of each other. I also laugh because a lot of times a lot of times teams will paint their visiting locker rooms a specific color to relax them, to calm them down, as even
Hmm.
just maybe a little nod of a mind game. But it's always interesting on how. Oh yeah, that makes sense to me because learning all about the built environment and history, it's one of
Hmm.
those things where it's always interesting how those things keep coming back, to your mind.
Oh, it does. Yeah. And it influences us much more than we, potentially realize. And I mean, I'm sure there's a range of how people are influenced based on their nervous system and things like that. But yeah, we're being influenced by the built environment, like, every minute of the day. So
Well, Claudette, if people want to learn more about you, your organization, the work you're doing, where can they find you?
thanks. So my website is claudetterowleydesign.com. So first and last name and design.com. I'm also on Instagram at Claudette Rowley. And then if you type in my name and LinkedIn, I'm going to show up there also.
Well, Claudette, I want to thank you. I did not expect to talk about the built environment and history today, but it is one of those really exciting things I love talking about. So thank you again.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I enjoyed our conversation. Thanks so much.
We'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
That was another fun episode of Into the Unknown. I truly appreciate you taking the time to listen. And if it provides you any value or entertainment, I would love if you shared it with others, liked, subscribed, and really just help the podcast grow. Again, tell a friend, tell a foe, just anyone who might enjoy hearing some stories of people's own journeys and what got them to where they are today. Till next time.